technical assistance and capacity building workforce training and development investments. My name is Tabitha Willman. I am the manager of the Clean Transportation Outreach section within the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, as we'll refer to ourselves today. With me facilitating the two main topics of today's work group are Diane Sanchez, who will lead the discussion related to technical assistance and capacity building, and also Noemi Vitella, who's going to be leading the discussion related to workforce training and development. And also Nick Narenfurch is going to be leading the question and discussion portions today. So materials for today's work group are available on CARB's Low Carbon Transportation Investments and Air Quality Improvement, or AQIP, program meetings and workshops webpage, and the link is going to be put into the chat. Nick is going to go ahead and put that in right now, so you can access the presentation, the agenda, and follow along that way if you'd like. So as a reminder, today's meeting is being recorded. We anticipate the recording is going to be available on that web page that I mentioned in about 2 weeks' time. Today, we're going to be using the Zoom raised hand and question and answer box features to help facilitate our comments and our questions. So if a question is added to the question and answer box and it's down at the bottom of the Zoom, it will be read aloud so that all the attendees can hear both the question as well as the response. And we'll also have instructions on how to use the raise hand feature. We'll be repeating those instructions each time we do our comment period. So we want to be mindful of our timing and preserve the allotted time for comment period as much as possible today. So if there are specific questions of interest or areas, specific comments or questions that you have, go ahead and enter them into the Zoom question and answer box. If we happen to go beyond what we have time to adequately address today, we'll follow up accordingly after the work group, and we will also consider topics where additional information may be needed, so we may reach out for one-on-one discussions too. If there are Zoom disruptions for any reason, including malicious intent, we will immediately end the meeting and we'll send out a notice to reschedule. Unfortunately, we can't allow any anonymous participants for security reasons, so please make sure your name is clear on the Zoom platform. As mentioned today, we have two main topics of focus, both of which are related to funding that was identified in the fiscal year 21-22 funding plan, and that was approved by CARB last November. So the first topic is technical assistance and capacity building investment, and that's related to outreach on CARB's low carbon transportation investment projects. We will talk about our previous efforts in this area, as well as looking for feedback, and we're going to have some specific questions related to our proposal on this topic. We'll then take a 10-minute break in between topics. And then the second topic we'll cover today is related to workforce training and development investment. And there will also be dedicated discussion and questions for this topic. At the end of the work group today, we will be providing a brief overview of some upcoming meetings and engagement related to this next fiscal year 22-23 funding plan. That covers future funding and investment. And now I'm going to pass it over to Diane to lead the first topic discussion. So Diane.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Tab. My name is Diane Sanchez, and I'm an air pollution specialist in CARB's Mobile Source Control Division. So I work under Tabitha. And thank you, everyone, for being here today and engaging with us on our potential plans for the technical assistance and capacity building investment for fiscal year 21-22. And this investment is very important in helping us bridge the gap for the state's most under-resourced communities. It's going to help provide training, funding, staffing, and other outreach resources that are needed to allow community organizations and some of these most hard to reach communities increase their awareness and access to our clean transportation incentives. Next slide, please. So today we're going to start with a short overview of Carb's past technical assistance and capacity building efforts and what we've learned. Then we're going to pass it on to Maria Crook of Grid Alternatives on the technical assistance and capacity building outreach pilot from last year, and we'll talk about the lessons that we learned. And then finally, we'll present to you our proposal for the Technical Assistance Capacity Building Outreach Program for fiscal year 2021-2022 that builds on our lessons learned. Next slide. So in 2014, Carb started to receive funding from the California Climate Investments from the Cap and Trade program. And Carb staff worked with disadvantaged communities to conduct outreach on our California Climate Investments programs and low transportation investments as well. However, we did realize that there was a need to better support community-based organizations and the relations that they have with their communities. And we really wanted to partner with them to provide training and resources for clean transportation outreach. So during fiscal year 2018-2019, CARB collaborated with the Strategic Growth Council and with the Local Government Commission to train staff from community-based organizations, or CBOs, on how to train their staff members to expand their reach. And then through that, 10 CBOs received training and small stipends for conducting outreach on CARB's clean transportation programs. So through this outreach pilot, we learned that CBOs would require more resources and support to successfully conduct this outreach, including a robust training curriculum, increased funding, and administrative support. Next slide, please. So in the fiscal year 2019-2020 funding plan, there were $7 million that were allocated to support a comprehensive outreach strategy to meet the broader clean transportation and mobility needs of community residents, while also implementing several of CARB's SB 350 guidance document priority recommendations. So we dedicated 1 million of these funds for additional outreach support, technical assistance, and capacity building for priority populations through funding to local community-based organizations. And so this funding was allocated to Access Clean California, to pilot additional capacity building grants to smaller grassroots CBOs representing historically overburdened and underrepresented communities. And this pilot supported an initial cohort of 6 CBOs from across the state to develop fellowship opportunities, training curriculum, materials, and other capacity building efforts to support targeted outreach in priority communities. So with that, next we're going to hear from Maria Crook at Grid Alternatives, who's the administrator for Access Clean California, and we'll talk about the lessons they learned from the technical assistance and capacity building pilot. So Maria, it's all you.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. I'm Maria. I use she, her pronouns, and really happy to get the chance to talk with you all about the work we've been doing over the past year and a half. All right, so slide, I guess. Yeah, so between 2021 and 2022, we were really excited to administer the statewide capacity building project for the Air Resources Board. And so at the onset, we set these metrics to guide our agile strategy throughout the year. And you can see that it was increasing awareness and participation in clean mobility incentive programs, building partner organizations' capacity to conduct a data-informed community outreach, creating trusted relationships between everyone involved, and then resulting in reusable curriculum. And we'll get into kind of the outcomes, but wanted to set the scene in terms of what our goals were at the outset. And slide. Great. And so from the beginning, we wanted to make sure we removed one of the first barriers to funding access for small CBOs, and that's lengthy applications. So one barrier to receiving funding is the time and capacity it takes to apply for funding. And we wanted to ensure that those organizations who need capacity building the most are not barred from accessing the funding that they need. So what that kind of looked like was a short screener was shared, which was really, so it was just a Google form to ensure that folks didn't waste time applying if they weren't eligible. And then we hosted short objective interviews in place of lengthy written applications. And then lastly, you can see that we chose organizations based off of geographic and demographic gaps and current clean mobility outreach, and then organizations' potential to expand along with their alignment and mission values and existing services. Slide. And these are just a list of our partners. We partnered with organizations serving a range of communities from the greater LA and IE region to tribal rancherias in Mendocino and Butte counties. And so it was really a joy to be able to working with folks in such spread across the state. Slide. And so before getting into the details of the timeline, I wanted to just highlight the undercurrent of uplifting our capacity building partners' agency and knowledge about their own needs throughout the process. So you can see that in the first 3 months of 2021, we onboarded orgs and oriented fellows to the project. So in this phase, we did a lot of co-developing our shared expectations. Then in Q2, we began to host workshops for orgs, which were largely informed through one-on-one check-ins with our CBO partners. And then in Q3 and Q4, we're really about bringing groups together to learn together, implementing our own project admin learning based on that participant feedback, and then preparing folks to transition out of the pilot. And then lastly, you can see over the past couple months of this year, we were documenting and sharing our learnings both with Carb as well as with our partner organizations to ensure we were fully closing the loop in terms of information. And slide. And here, I just wanted to share some of the exciting outreach that happened throughout the pandemic, thanks to our partners. And so in the top right image, you can see our outreach partner, Latino and Latino Roundtable, doing their yoga and learning in the park. And then on the bottom image, you can see our partner, East Oakland Collective, tabling at a Coma market in East Oakland's Black Cultural Zone. So it was really exciting and just such a thrill to witness all the ways that folks were getting creative. Slide. So here you can see some of our metrics, and we were able to evaluate these based off of our experience with one-on-one check-ins that happened monthly, and then also Google surveys throughout the process. So different types of information gathering informed these, and so you can see 80% of participating CBOs strongly recommended this program. 50% of partners reported increased ability to use that data-driven approaches in their outreach. 20+ workshops, trainings, and networking events that have reusable criteria. And then majority of participating CBOs reported improved relationships with Carb and other public agencies. And so we were really excited about all of these. Slide. And then for highlights, you can see we were really excited actually by how much innovative outreach happened and how community-centered it was. And additionally, the workshops that folks were able to measurably increase their skill set. And then along with the workshops, we had coaching from external, one coaching from external consultants. So those two paired together really led folks to a lot of success. And then so there was high satisfaction with the one-on-one support from Access, and really impactful professional development with our fellows that happened throughout. Slide. And then in terms of our lessons learned, something that we really came out of this with was just the importance of a multi-year investment, how it would allow longer onboarding processes, just people to get to know each other better and build stronger bonds of trust. And additionally, it would allow our capacity building partners the ability to plan their own scope of work and plan for how they were going to grow, which is really one of the best things we can do for their growth. Another thing was just investing in CBO staff rather than temporary staff. And while it was really so amazing to work with the fellows, and we really all had an amazing experience with the fellows, ultimately having fellows as a structural thing didn't work as well in terms of building the capacity of existing staff. The time it took to onboard people and manage people who were newer to the clean mobility field was ultimately took time away from folks' ability to grow in other areas. And then flexible structure, it was just integral. I mean, I think that's something probably we've all learned over the past 2 years, but particularly in capacity building, it was really important to be able to pivot and adapt in response to feedback as program admins. An example of that is how we initially started out with doing more work group type of curriculum and workshops. But ultimately, throughout conversations, stuff actually ended up towards the end of the time focusing more on one-on-one conversations or one-on-one trainings between facilitators and our partners, because that just seems like it was working better. And then lastly, just again, the one-on-one availability of access staff was essential to being able to be there for our partners and fully be present and be able to make sure that we were providing like 360 support. And I believe that is all. If you want to slide, I want to hand it off to Diane, and thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Maria. That was a great overview of last year's pilot program. And so now with that, we're going to look forward and present to you a proposal that we have for the technical assistance and capacity building outreach program for the fiscal year 21 and 22 based on the lessons learned from last year. Next slide, please. All right, so our goals for the next cycle of the Technical Assistance and Capacity Building Outreach Program include strengthening the CBO's ability to conduct data-informed community outreach. And we want to do this through a series of workshops, training, and by developing a tailored outreach plan that'll help them achieve their CBO's outreach goals and also help them disseminate information on Carb's clean transportation programs. We also want to focus on our state's historically underserved communities who often get overlooked for clean transportation funding and increase their knowledge and access to clean transportation programs. And finally, it's important for us to build long-term relationships with these communities in CARB. We want to foster a sustainable relationship with underserved communities that really goes beyond the lifetime of this program. Next slide, please. So the lessons learned from the last year of the pilot were compiled with the help of CBO exit interviews and feedback from our cohort of participants. So this dialogue is what helped us construct our current proposed framework for this year's Technical Assistance Capacity Building Outreach Program. We found that connections to the resources that were provided through Access Clean California, such as the outreach partner training, materials available through the resource hub, and the knowledge and expertise in clean transportation from Grid Alternative staff, who we just heard from, are a huge benefit to providing tailored technical assistance to these smaller organizations. And so given that, we're proposing that we use this $1 million allocated to fund the continuation of the technical assistance capacity building outreach program through Access Clean California. So based on these funds, we can select anywhere from 6 to 10 representatives from different CBOs who serve historically overlooked communities to participate in this program. And we're going to work to bring in new communities into this program as well. And Grid Alternatives has been very successful in previous projects, and we want them to continue to administer the Technical Assistance Capacity Building Outreach Program to include the additional $1 million over an extended timeline of 2 years. So this extended time frame will really allow us to dedicate more time to onboarding. So 6 months to onboarding and training the CBO representatives, and then 1.5 years to focus on their outreach and efforts in the communities that they serve. So that would be the extended 2-year time frame. Next slide, please. So here we want to cover the support that the CBOs will receive. We're proposing that CBOs would be reimbursed to cover direct costs such as staffing, administration, outreach, and other necessary implementation costs. And additionally, CBOs would also receive added capacity building support in the form of one-on-one guidance by staff at Grid Alternatives, other training consultants, administrative support, external training, materials, and resources that are available to all Access Clean California outreach partners. And so under this framework, all of the $1 million would be spent on the CBOs, whether it's direct or through support and technical assistance. Next slide, please. All right, and I think I'll hand it over to Nick.
All right, thank you very much. I'm looking at the, we do have a question so far from Susan Wheeler, but we'll answer that in just a second. I just want to read the sort of rules and process for making comments and answering questions. So initially, please use the raised hand function and press #2 if you're calling by phone. You can also submit the questions or comments in the question and answer box on Zoom. Just as a reminder too, for all of our benefits, please state your name and affiliation before you ask a question or make a comment. So I will call on folks who raise their hand, and I'll also read out instructions or questions or comments from the Q&A box as necessary. Also, for folks raising their hand, I'll call on you when it's your turn and unmute your mic. Just please remember to unmute on your end. And if you're calling in by phone, to unmute yourself, please press #6. So with that, we can go ahead and open it up to questions or comments. Do we have a next slide we can to look at for that? So here are some questions for everybody to consider, but also feel free to ask your own questions and make your own comments as well. So those discussion items and questions are: what should be considered when prioritizing communities for outreach, technical assistance, and capacity building? Also, are there any additional recommended goals for future outreach for technical assistance and capacity building? And finally, are there any suggested changes to the outreach technical assistance capacity building framework? So with those discussion items in mind, I guess we can go ahead and get to the first question that we had in the Q&A box from Susan Wheeler that was directed to Maria. So I'll hand it over to you, Maria, to answer that question.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, Susan. So partners did have the opportunity to work together.
Maria, can we read the question first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Did the partners and their participants have opportunities to work together, or did each of the partners work separately? And yes, partners had the opportunity to work together frequently. We had sessions devoted to just cross-learning. And then, so Grid Alternatives and Access Clean California actually has a larger outreach partner network that expands geographically beyond the 6 partners I mentioned. So we actually were able to connect folks with those partners who aren't in our capacity building program, but already in our outreach partners program, like network. And so if they were in the region, we were able to connect them, let them learn from each other, and as well as share any outreach events if they wanted.
Thank you, Maria. I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A box, and I don't see any raised hands at this point. So I don't know if we want to wait a few more moments, or I know after this, we have a break before the next topic. So maybe we can wait a few more moments to see if anybody has an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment. Otherwise, we can take a break and move on to the next topic after the break. Okay, I'm not seeing any more raised hands. And just as a reminder to folks, you feel free to, if there's a question you weren't able to answer during this, feel free, or the question comes to you after, feel free to contact us and we'll happily answer your question or respond to your comment at that point. But thank you very much.
Oh, Nick, there's a question. I see a hand raised.
All right, great. Okay, let me scroll down. See if I can find it. Oh, that's Tin. Okay, I'm gonna unmute your mic, Tin, and I'll remind you to unmute on your end too, and state your affiliation and name, please.
Sure. My name's Tin Lee. I'm a supervisor at the Bay Area Quality Management District, also a staff lead on the Bay Area's Clean Cars for All program. My question is, I see that like 80% of the CBOs would strongly recommend this program. What happened to the other 20%? Is there like what are some of the reasons why they didn't recommend this approach? And then also was there any metrics being tracked in terms of like demographics of like participants, and then also are you tying in like any like conversions of like through the outreach, like whether or not participants are applying for some of the programs, or after they learn about it, like is there anything that's being done, or like or like how effective is the work being done, I guess?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think there were 3 questions in that, and I got 2 of them, so I'm gonna come back to, I think. But in terms of what happened to the 20%, so that was actually just one organization, and I think if my math is correct. And it was on our survey, it was like recommend with reservations and don't recommend. So the other 20% was in the recommend with reservations, and that was, we didn't have like a follow-up within that question where that metric comes from, but we had pretty close relationships and with folks throughout. So what I would say from that specific instance is that it was like a complete mixture of things, some of which is like some of our organizations weren't entirely jazzed on doing, or like it didn't make sense with their communities to be focusing so heavily on electric vehicles based off of their organizational goals and how they kind of had come to define themselves. Some of it was, I think, frustration over program closures, which I know is like something that everyone on this call was frustrated by, and it's not unique, but just like, okay, we're not necessarily, we don't have to be doing this. And then lastly, I would say it was like not all, yeah, kind of tangential, or like with that is that not all the organizations are in the crossroad were like mobility or transportation specific community-based organizations, because that wasn't essential to us. And so some of them, I think, came out of it was like, okay, we don't necessarily need to be doing that. And then, so that was part 1. You had a second question before the tracking through to like outreach.
The other question was like around like demographics, or are you like?
Yeah, in terms of demographics, are you talking about the CBO staff, or who the CBOs were served, like what they're like identified
I think
communities are?
I think a combination of both. Like I mean, I see some of these organizations, and some of them are they're tribal or Black focused, African American focused, and things like that. But I'm thinking about like also like the conversions of like whether or not participants, like if there are metrics being tracked on like who's being like reached through these efforts.
Yeah, that's a good question. So number 1 is that yes, it's like I would say some of the organizations have very specific and targeted, like maybe demographic, and some of them demographic like targets. Obviously, Latino Roundtable, their targeting is primarily within the Latinx community within the Pomona Riverside area. But not all of them are obviously like that. In terms of tracking how like their outreach specifically transferred over to any sort of like program uptake. I think that this year, I think there's a number of things, but this year was a particularly challenging one to do that, just with program closures. And folks were actually, according like with the timeline, folks were onboarded to the project in March, and that's when we received. It was like 2 weeks after we onboarded them that a lot of the programs got shut, statewide programs got shut down, and so that put a lot of folks into like doing program outreach could not be like their number one thing that they were presenting to communities, because number one, it wasn't an outreach program, it was a capacity building program. And number two, their ability, like there was no way that they wanted to come to their community fully, like with only the programs and be like, oh wait, but they're closed. So the short answer is like, there's no metrics in terms of like specific conversions, but there is the metrics of like the communities that they were working with and targeting and talking about the programs with. Is there any, do you have follow-up? Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to add on.
Yeah.
I wanted, go ahead. I wanted to jump in too, but go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, Tin, thank you for your questions, and Maria, thank you for answering that as well. And I just wanted to add for the pilot for the program moving forward for this year, we really want to be able to figure out the best way to prioritize communities for this program. And so a couple of things that we're thinking about doing is really using a data-driven approach where we look at where has there typically been program uptake, and then identify the gaps. What are the gaps in demographics? What are the gaps geographically? And then once we identify those gaps where there is a greater need and where there's been historically communities that have been overlooked, that's where we kind of want to focus. And so that's something that we're thinking about moving forward. And that's also why we pose this first question is, what things should we consider when prioritizing communities for this upcoming program? So yeah, thank you for asking that, because that's something that we really want to consider. And yeah.
I have a follow-up too, if I can.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So the context and the reason why I'm asking these questions is, with our Clean Cars for All program, we do track demographics for participants who participate in our program, and we're seeing gaps, right? We see that we need to do a better job with outreach and increasing participation among Black and Latinx communities, African American communities, and tribal communities as well. So like, I don't think all the other programs, or I don't know which ones actually track these kind of demographics, but the metrics that we historically look at are really just income and whether or not you're in a DAC. And like, unless like we start defining what kind of metrics we need to start looking at, like it's going to be hard to like focus in on some of those areas, right? Like there needs to be uniformity across the programs, and we need to be tracking all this data. And then we also need, at our level, like I think we need support on on like funding to like help pay for some of these things. But maybe if we can do this and get some of the CBOs that we work with and we've talked to, involved in this program, it might make sense to help build the capacity and bridge those gaps that way. But that's something that I think, I know is a concern, and it's something that we want to try to focus on and do a better job at the Air District. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for that suggestion. I've definitely made note of that, like better metrics to keep track of demographic and the types of information that will really help us moving forward, identify those gaps and really focus on the folks that we've been overlooking. So yeah, thank you very much, Tin. We appreciate that.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on, Tin, that's a great point. And one of the things that we're looking at is, like, definitely there's the Clean Cars for All program, there's the Clean Vehicle Assistance and Financing System, as well as Clean Vehicle Assistance and Financing programs. And then also, the CVRP additional rebates. And we want to look at all of those programs together, like where, and identify the exact things that you're talking about. Where are we missing out on program uptake, and how does that overlay with the outreach that's being done? Where do we have outreach partners in place? Where are there communities for which outreach or information and awareness is just lacking in those communities? And we're hearing this exact same things you are. There are specific communities that are being overlooked, and we want to focus on those. How do we get those? How do we get to the demographics that we're missing out on? And so I think those are all the things that we're trying to build into the program as we go forward. As Diane said, make sure that we've got data-driven approaches and strategies, but also there's a balance of like finding who are the right CBOs to be working with in the communities. And that is, I think, a process that we're learning a lot about. And so when we mentioned, we got having the extra interviews was fantastic. Like, we got a lot of great information, and that was really like those one-on-one conversations as to what were the challenges that each of the community organizations faced, and what do we need to change about our program to make it more sustainable or make it work better for the community organizations. And that's what we heard. Like, having fellows was a great concept, but maybe in practicality it posed its own challenges. Also, the time frames, thinking about too, timing of outreach. And this is kind of a bigger thing that we've been addressing through Access Clean California, but also as we do our TA capacity building, like making sure that we have the timing of the cycles when funding is most available, because it is kind of a cyclical nature. And so either being able to prepare the community organizations to be out in their communities at times when funding is available, or just having that messaging, that there are times when the programs are shut down or out of money. So all those things are great things, lots for us to think about, but we really appreciate your questions and your feedback.
I just jump in and say one thing I think is relevant, or I guess reemphasize one thing that I think is relevant to Tin's comment and questions, and then the discussion we've had since is with the pilot, many of the outreach partners, many of the CBOs that were participating in the program became formal outreach partners with Access Clean California. So, during the period that they had in the TA capacity building program to really learn how to conduct outreach and gain that capacity, even though that coincided with a period where due to the delayed budget, that a lot of the programs temporarily were out of funding. These organizations, through the outreach partner network and access, still have the opportunity to leverage what they've learned and the capacity they build to conduct outreach in their communities. And I think that's something that we're very much considering with the next round of funding is, in addition to expanding the length of time over which that funding is available for TA capacity building, but also graduating to the CBOs and to become formal partners in Access Clean California. And they can continue to get funding that way. But at that point, they'll have built the capacity and really have the ability to conduct effective outreach in their communities. So I think that I just wanted to highlight that point. Otherwise, I think we're ready for a break. I don't see any more raised hands or any questions in the Q&A box. So we'll take a 10-minute break now. So I'm seeing it's 1:41, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. So if folks can come back at 1:51, and we'll get started on the workforce training and development topic for today's meeting. Thank you very much. See you shortly.
Okay, so I think we're all back here. So hello, everyone. I am Noemi Vitela with the California Air Resources Board, and I'm the lead staff for the Workforce Training and Development Investments. And I want to welcome you to the second half of today's public work group meeting, focus on the Workforce Training and Development Investment for the fiscal year 2021-2022 funding plan for clean transportation incentives. This is the second work group on this investment, and we're here to provide you an additional opportunity to solicit feedback as we move forward with our investment. Today, I'm also joined by Larry Rulera from the California Energy Commission to participate in this discussion, who is actually one of our key partners and collaborators on workforce training and development. So let's move on to our next slide. Thank you, Mac. So we do have a few topics we would like to cover with you in this next section. I will begin with a brief introduction and a background on the fiscal year 2021-2022 workforce training and development investment. Next, Larry Rieta from the California Energy Commission will be providing a quick overview of their workforce efforts as they relate to the partnership with Carb. And lastly, I will provide the staff proposal for the fiscal year 2021-2022 workforce training and development investment, and we'll pose some questions to help guide the design of the investment. Our goals today are to have an open discussion about how Carb should move forward with fiscal year 21-22 workforce investments, and provide an opportunity for you to ask questions and provide us with feedback. So to provide some background, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. The leading policy driver for this investment is the SB 350 Low Income Barriers Report that emphasizes the need for Carb and the California Energy Commission to promote workforce equity and expand clean transportation workforce training and development programs and investments, especially those with connections to well-paid and sustainable careers. In the Barriers Report, communities identified the need for more training and workforce programs that prepare California's workforce for clean transportation adoption and also support economic recovery through sustainable workforce opportunities. Along with prioritizing workforce equity principles through our clean mobility projects, this dedicated funding in the fiscal year 2021-22 funding plan will further Carb's efforts to address community identified needs and reduce workforce barriers. So to continue, go ahead and thank you. Carb held a work group meeting July 2021 to discuss our initial goals and ideas for the workforce investment. We heard great feedback, and since then we've been exploring various opportunities related to the feedback. We met with state agency partners and leading workforce agencies to shape our focus based on gaps and where funds would be most impactful. In November 2022, the board approved a $1.5 million allocation to help create new or support existing workforce training and development efforts in clean transportation and mobility programs. This was intended to be a complementary to and to build upon Carb's low carbon transportation investments, where workforce training and development has been encouraged from the start. Next slide. So at our first work group, we proposed to use this allocation to help leverage or expand existing workforce training and development programs. Since then, we have received much feedback and want to share with you what we've learned. One core recommendation we heard was to invest in dealership training in impacted communities. We actually looked into this area and we learned that there's some potential barriers and constraints due to today's economy. Also, although this is a worthwhile investment, our funds need to focus on equity and helping in underserved communities. We do have dealership training in other programs like CVRP, and we believe it's better to focus our limited funds not really covered by other programs and where we can bolster equity. Additionally, dealerships currently have limited inventory of clean technology vehicles, and during this time, it makes most sense these funds be put towards investments that can help expand workforce training and development programs immediately. We also heard there's still a need to partner with adult and vocational school programs that are focused on developing the clean transportation technology workforce, in particular to support existing programs that we have not traditionally partnered with and which have been overlooked for state funding. We also heard a need to support Assembly Bill 841 and charging infrastructure training statewide. We're working with the CEC and other state and local partners to understand the impacts of AB 841 implementation on programs and to design our investments to leverage that policy direction to think broadly about career paths beyond electrical or construction focused programs. And lastly, we also heard we should consider high roads principles during the implementation of these funds, including increasing access to and pathways for good quality clean transportation jobs. Across our clean transportation investments, we are considering how best to support high road jobs, such as those that provide benefits and career pathways. We are working closely with agencies such as the California Workforce Development Board and are exploring ways to integrate these standards, such as job quality and access, into our clean mobility programs. One example is that we're identifying language that can be incorporated into our grants and solicitations to support high roads principles. Next slide. So we recognize that it's important we collaborate with existing workforce training partners, experts, and longstanding implementers. We have been working with the California Energy Commission, the California Workforce Development Board, and the Employment Training Panel to help identify where we need to focus. We're also interested in partnering with other organizations that can help shape our investment, and in particular, to help identify and expand existing workforce training and development programs, to minimize duplication of the work we're doing and our objectives, to leverage existing funding to maximize benefits and impacts of the investments, and lastly, to allow us to mutually learn and provide spaces to share our lessons learned. So with that, I will now pass it over to Larry Rillera from the California Energy Commission, who will be going over Carb's workforce training and development projects partnerships with the CEC.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Noemi. Hopefully you can all hear me. My name is Larry Riera. I am staff here at the California Energy Commission's Clean Transportation Program. And one of the areas I lead in terms of policies and partnerships and investments is workforce training and development. I'm going to talk about 3 areas very briefly for purposes of this workshop and the discussion. The first is our portfolio. Our Clean Transportation Program has invested since its inception almost $40 million into workforce training and development. The results have been over 22,000 trainees and trainers for the dollars. There's been new partnerships that have also been created, predominantly in the early years with the sister state agencies, some of which Noemi has mentioned. Additionally, I should talk about the goals of the Clean Transportation Workforce Training and Development. They include the development of clean transportation career pathways, focus on job creation, job quality, and job quantity. We are also more recently aligned to ZEV jobs with ZEV and ZEV infrastructure deployments. We leverage workforce partnerships and investments. We prioritize priority communities and priority populations, and we support small, minority, women, disabled veteran, and LGBTE-owned business enterprises. I would note that this morning, the Energy Commission had a workshop on the Clean Transportation Program where we had publicly unveiled through our staff draft investment plan, $15 million in additional funding over the next 2.5 years. The second area I would like to cover is our partnership with Carb and our recently released Ideal ZEV Workforce Pilot Project. This was a $6.5 million partnership and investment by Carb into this area. The focus was on the goals, but more importantly, the focus on community-based goals and projects supporting ZEV deployment and ZEV work. There were 14 projects that are proposed for award. They have yet to go in front of the full commission for approval. The projects have statewide interest all the way up north, if you will, the North Coast, Humboldt, and tribal training program for ZEVs, all the way down to the border. We'll have projects north and south and east to west, the Central Valley. Some of them will include transit agencies and some of the other vocations such as school buses, some medium heavy duty, and of course, light duty vehicle on and off-road applications as well. I think the take home message for the solicitation and the results is diversity. If you'll indulge me, diversity of applicants from small nonprofits to our esteemed California colleges, diversity in training needs from EV and EV charging in Spanish to hydrogen refueling station engineering, diversity of equity and geographic diversity from tribes in Humboldt to a farm community and the central San Joaquin Valley, diversity of ZEV and ZEV infrastructure from light duty on-road vehicles to EV chargers and to ZEV manufacturing. And finally, diversity of project partners, including the Northern California Teamsters to the electric vehicle infrastructure training program to many, many other employers. The last point I'd like to reference is through a piece of legislation that was passed last year, SB 589. And the reason I mention is for the three elements that were contained in the bill and will call us closer to our state agencies, including Carb, to work on the solutions and implementation for some of the issues we mentioned in our first part of the work group meeting on equity in communities to this panel. Focus a little bit more on the workforce dimensions. So there are three elements to SB 589 that I will allude to. One of them has to do with the inclusion of manufacturing and that sort of early commercial manufacturing workforce that includes areas such as the Lithium Valley down in the southern part of the state and other technologies like that as they move from research development and deployment to early commercial. The second part of SB 583 references the inclusion of new workforce partners, and these would include the California Conservation Corps, the California Mobility Center, and others. The last part of the bill requires the Energy Commission to conduct an assessment of the resources that are needed to support the workforce training and development and the body of work in our AB 2127 report. Our AB 2127 is focused on the estimates, projections of electric vehicle chargers for both light duty and medium and heavy duty segments. This workforce assessment and the work group process will be conducted this year. And that would include partners such as Carb to evaluate the options for investments going forward. With that, I want to thank you for your attention. Turn it back over to Noemi. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, so before we move on to our next agenda item, we do want to take a few moments to take a couple questions if there's any questions on the material we just covered, on the background for workforce training and development investment, or on anything that Larry just covered. Nick, I don't know if you're able to see any raised hands or.
I don't, there's no questions in or comments in the Q&A box. I don't see any raised hands at this point. Yeah, just a reminder to folks, if you do have a question or comment, please use the raised hand function. And if you're calling by phone, that's #2. That just lets me know you have something to say or a question to ask. Or you can also submit just into the Q&A box if you don't feel like speaking. And just always state your name and affiliation. So I do see a raised, I did see a raised hand, but it's gone now. I don't know if we want to wait here a moment, Noemi, or move on up to you.
Let's give folks a few moments.
Sure.
Or a moment. we do have another opportunity towards the second half to provide more comments. So I think we can move on.
Okay.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, so for this next portion, I will be covering our proposal for the fiscal year 2021-2022 workforce development investment and objectives. So staff's recommending allocating the 1.5 million fiscal year 2021-2022 funding plan investment towards bolstering existing adult and vocational school programs. This idea is directly tied to what we've heard in the past work groups and one-on-one conversations with stakeholders, partners, and workforce training experts. This proposal also helps bridge some of the gap in state funding that has passed up these institutions, and we believe that these funds are a great opportunity to work with non-traditional groups doing workforce training work. Specifically, the objectives for this funding are to expand reach of clean transportation workforce training and development programs in underserved communities, and to support curriculum for zero emission technology, to prioritize workforce equity, and lastly, to expand partnerships to support community identified workforce needs. Carb staff proposes to narrow our focus as much as possible with these funds to make sure we are filling the most essential gaps, and that we consider critical community identified needs as we move forward with additional investments. With an allocation of 1.5 million, Carb can potentially fund one existing adult and vocational school program, which will be identified in partnership with other state partners to leverage existing workforce training programs. Next slide, please. So to the extent possible, Carb is looking to collaborate with an existing state partner and use this investment to fund an existing adult and vocational schools workforce training and development program. Some of the program elements we're considering are those focused on clean transportation or transition to zero emission training and curriculum, partnering with an institution that supports regional programs serving most underserved communities, a program that provides long-term sustainability in communities, and builds capacity for programs to access future funding opportunities. Also, one that focuses on hands-on practical application and skill building or upskilling, and prioritizes high school and younger education as part of the curriculum to boost awareness of clean transportation elements and workforce training opportunities. Lastly, that it provides clear pathways to quality employment opportunities, for example, higher wages, better health benefits, and elements such as those. So now that we've presented to you our investment goals, we want to hear from you on some of the questions we're trying to answer. So if you can move on to the next slide. We want to open up a discussion and solicit your feedback on the following discussion questions, but Nick is going to help us queue up some of your questions to ensure that we gather your feedback and that we give everybody an opportunity to speak.
All right, I think folks are pretty familiar with the process. So yeah, just to raise your hand, use the raise hand function or press #2 on your phone or enter a question in the Q&A box. I do see a question right now, a raised hand from Susan Wheeler. So Susan, I'm just going to allow you to speak. So you just have to unmute yourself. There you go. And you can speak now. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Susan Wheeler, and I'm with Sacramento Municipal Utility District. I focus on regional workforce. My question is whether there'll be an opportunity to leverage some other funding sources, for example, Pell Grants, perhaps for the participants of these programs.
Thank you, Susan. So to answer your question, yes, we want to, with these funds, we want to bolster programs that are already doing this type of work. And if there's any additional funding that can help support and bolster what funding we are providing through these funds, I think that's an excellent opportunity. What we want to do today is we want to identify the various programs that we can potentially look into and help support. And if that's an element that's part of that program, I think that if it's an added plus, I think that's something we definitely would consider. Tab or Ashley, I don't know if there's anything else you guys would like to add on that question.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay, I'm not, thank you, Susan, for your question. I'm not, or comment, I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised at this point.
Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, there are a few questions that we need, we want to answer today, and hopefully this can prompt some discussion and provide us some additional information. So some of the questions that we would like to answer today are what goals and objectives are we missing with what I've listed before? And then also, are there any existing efforts that fit our investment goals that we should be aware of? And thirdly, are there any specific vocational schools in California, especially in underserved communities, that Carb should be considering for leveraging opportunities?
Okay, we got a couple raised hands. I'll see the first raised hand was from Enid. I'm going to allow you to talk. Just please unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nina Jaffe from Green Paradigm Consulting. Two questions. First of all, some learning programs that I've been working with are virtual self-guided learning programs. Are those part of what would be eligible as part of the program? And second question is whether it seems like a great transition from training to job is some sort of paid apprenticeship or internship. And this is not just for electrical type jobs, but repair jobs, design jobs, programming jobs and electrification, all of those things. So is that part of the priorities as well?
Yeah, so to answer the first part of your question, we do understand, given the nature right now, there are a lot of programs that are available virtually or online. And if that's an element that's part of a program, if it's part of the program that helps support some of these communities that are needing these type of funds, I think that's something that we're definitely considering. I don't think it's a new thing in the training world, so it's definitely something. If it's an element part of a program, it's not discouraged, so it's something we would also support. And then to answer your next question, yes, paid apprenticeships is also another thing that we would be considering. One thing that we heard is that we need to really focus on helping support existing adult vocational schools, and that's part of what we're proposing here today. And if paid apprenticeship is part of that type of program, or part of a program that we can help support with these funds, yes, that's something we're considering as well. I hope that answered your question. I don't know if there's any comments from Tab.
I just wanted to jump in really quickly, Noemi, a couple quick thoughts to add to this. First and foremost, one thing we've heard pretty consistently across our work group discussions and with stakeholders is that accessing training opportunities, especially in light of COVID and everything, is really challenging. So I think to that end, we would definitely encourage opportunities for virtual learning, as long as there is an ability to have some on-site hands-on, because that we know is really critical, especially in the ZEV space. And then I just want to echo what Noemi said about the paid apprenticeship or internship. I think we're really focused on zero emission and electrical, but if there are opportunities to integrate some repair pieces to this as well, that's definitely something we've been hearing. There's a lot more interest in covering through this investment. So that would be something we would want to consider. Thank you, Enid, for the comments.
Thank you, Ashley.
All right, I think we have, unless Enid, you had any follow-up for that?
No, thank you.
All right, thanks, Enid. The next person we have, the question is Susan. Susan, I'll unmute you. Oh, there you go.
Thank you. Just a question regarding clarification and then maybe some suggestions on your third bullet point. So goals and objectives, I just want to make sure I understood areas of focus. It sounded like because there's other funding sources that the focus is not on infrastructure so much. Is that, I want to make sure I'm correct in that in terms of like charging infrastructure and those kinds of things. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yeah, so charging infrastructure could be an element in the program, but the main focus for these funds is to help support programs that are that have curriculum or training for zero emission transportation and clean technology. There are some programs that would have infrastructure elements built in, and that's not discouraged, but it is the focus is clean transportation and clean vehicle technology training and curriculum.
Okay, it was one of those chicken or an egg kind of things, right? Needing
Right.
the infrastructure in order for people to so just want to make sure I understood that correctly.
Yeah.
And then my guess is so I think I heard let's see, did I hear talk about this? I think so. I think Larry was talking about partnerships with the California Mobility Center. So my guess is you may already be aware of the Charles A. Jones Center in the Sacramento region, because they are a partner with California Mobility Center. But there's also, and I don't know if you wanted me to put it in the chat, so specific schools and programs. There's also Highlands Academy, and then there's a charter school in our region called Sava that is, and these all focus on that's kind of an alternative school for high school students. Sava and Charles A. Jones and Highlands are they're maybe focused on a little bit older demographic. They do help people get high school diplomas, but also the vocational aspect as well. So if you want me to put those in the chat, I can do that if that's helpful.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay.
All right, so we do have a question in the Q&A box, which I'll read out live and then hand it over to my colleagues to answer. So the question is from Dave Teasdale from Kern Community College District 21st Century Energy Center. The question is, will new classes in existing adult education programs be eligible? Also, want to state my support for paid internships and apprenticeship.
Thank you, David. So your question is, are new classes in existing adult education programs eligible? I think we're looking at an entire program, an entire comprehensive program that can help implement some of our goals here. And if there's new classes that are part of those programs, I think that's definitely encouraged and supported. I don't know if you have, or it looks like there's community college. Yeah, so our focus right now is adult and vocational schools, but if these classes help support those programs, I think that's something we would definitely consider.
Yeah, I think I have a comment to that as well. And welcome, Dave, to the work group meeting. Dave highlights a really important point and consideration in this discussion in that we're not looking at these sort of automotive or electrical programs of yesterday, regardless of who's putting them on. This energy field is so dynamic that you're going to learn some of the basics and the advanced electronics through these different venues and through these other disciplines, through these other market segments. So it's really important that when we start to talk about, as an example, Susan mentioned electric vehicle chargers. Well, that's also connected to the built environment. And so we look at the building energy, the electricity, the renewables, and all the other, not just state goals, but what is the triple bottom line for fleets and what is it for the consumer, especially the lower income consumer. So that type of comprehensive integrated thinking is where we're at today. So appreciate both of your comments.
We have another question. Or, no, sorry, this is a comment from Susan in the Q&A box. Thank you, Susan. She's listed some of the training programs that we can consider. So we've noted those, Susan. Thank you very much for that. Here, I'll let you talk, Susan. Just got to unmute yourself. There you
Sure, my pleasure. And one other, oops, it's noisy. Hold on a minute. One other resource in the community that is often overlooked, but really reaches deeply into our underserved communities is the library. And that may be a discussion for another time, but they have, they're in the communities, they're pillar communities, they have programs. I don't know if there's anybody ever looked at partnering with them in terms of some of the programs that you're talking about. They're, at least in our region, and I think in others, they're also looking to go mobile and take some of those programs into the communities. So, and use electric vehicles to do that. So if you've not thought about them as a partner, that may be, an area to explore.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I think I can jump into some feedback on this one. I had talked a little bit about our Ideal Zev Workforce project and partnership with Carb. One of our projects is actually going to do that here in Sacramento, partnering with the Sacramento Public Library System for both outreach and engagement and to attract participants and trainees for Zev technologies. So I appreciate that comment. That's certainly a model that can be replicated and should be replicated in areas of the state.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
So I'm not seeing any more raised hands or questions at the moment.
Okay, well, we can move on unless there's, I don't see questions either. Okay. Well, okay, so thank you everybody for the feedback and comments. We appreciate all the information you've provided, and to share a little bit on the timeline for this investment, we are planning to identify an adult vocational school partnership this summer, and we're hoping to actually enter into a partnership with the school by late summer this year. And as part of the next funding plan cycle over the next several months and ongoing into the future, we will continue to engage communities and stakeholders on considering how various workforce training and development program elements are incorporated, including workforce access and equity, and how we can best prioritize and integrate these into existing programs. So if you have any additional questions or would like to discuss more on the topics that we covered today, please reach out to us. We have provided our emails. You can always reach out to Diane Sanchez if you have questions on technical assistance and capacity building investments. And then you can feel free to reach out to me on workforce training and development investment information. We're also happy to hold one-on-one meetings or meet with you and your communities to get more input and feedback. And please don't hesitate again to reach out to us or request a separate meeting if necessary. So I want to thank you all for your discussions and for listening into what we have to share today. And next I will pass it on to Tab, who's going to discuss future funding plan developments.
Right. Thank you, Noemi. Thank you, everyone, for your participation in the discussion today. I think the recommendations on workforce training and development programs that we should look into and think about is definitely one thing we were hoping to get from today's meeting. Outlined on this slide are a timeline and some activities that are related to our next funding plan cycle, which we're currently in the middle of. It's the fiscal year 22-23 funding plan. And so we've got several milestones that we just want to kind of highlight. Now to mid-May, or in mid-May, the governor will be releasing the fiscal year 22-23 budget proposal. That'll give us some information on what we have to work with for our funding plan and going forward. In late May, we're going to be having our work group meetings for the long-term plan. And we started in March and we'll continue working on this through July. We've got various project-focused work group meetings that are focused on light duty, heavy duty, all of the various pieces and elements of the funding plan. In the summer, we will be having our final funding plan workshop. In the fall, we will be releasing the funding plan. And then in late fall, Carb board will be having the hearing to consider the funding plan. And so I know these are just general timeframes for, just for informational purposes, but the link at the bottom is where you will find all of the specific meetings, as well as, agendas and presentations. So I recommend checking back. And as Noemi said, please don't hesitate to contact us if you have further feedback for us or input or questions. We are more than happy to meet one-on-one, and we're really hoping to try and engage with communities more deeply too. So if you know of any community venues or events that we could come talk to communities at, please let us know, because we're looking to do that more robust engagement. Let's see, if there are no more questions or comments, this concludes our workshop today. As I mentioned, the recording will be available within the next 2 weeks on the website that's linked down at the bottom here. Other than that, anything else? No, I don't see any Q&A or hands. So anyway, thank you all so much for your time today, and have a great afternoon.